Before Joshua commanded the sun and the moon to stand still and lengthen the literal time of this day, there has never been another day like that since, and there never has been a day before that. Every day before this day and after that day has been a normal day. So to read the Bible and say, hey, that's a day, that's 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, Genesis 1 and 2, 1,000 years, is ridiculous.
Man 1976, and I am so happy that you're tuned in for this episode of BLOGCAST. As you heard in that opening grab, we are going to be dealing with a fairly common misunderstanding of one passage of scripture in this episode and how that misunderstanding subsequently affects other understandings. In that opening grab, we heard Pastor Joel Webbon of Right Response Ministries and senior pastor of Covenant Bible Church, preaching from the text of Joshua 10 in a sermon titled Standing on the Necks of Our Enemies. However, that particular clip comes from an excerpt of the sermon, which is unfortunately titled Theistic Evolution is Heresy. And before you tune out, let me just say that my intention here is not to defend theistic evolution. But I do believe that Pastor Joel's conclusion regarding those who might hold to it is largely indefensible. Rather, my focus in this video is to argue that the good pastor forces an interpretation onto the text of Joshua 10 that is unsustainable and tries to make the text into something that it simply is not. With that being said, just remember, all links are in the description below. So without further ado, one of the things we need to do is make a distinction between supernatural and miraculous. Now, that seems like a strange place to draw a line, but it is the line where we must make a necessary distinction, as Joshua 10 has both elements of the supernatural and the miraculous in it. Some might argue that what I'm doing here is trying to make a distinction where there is no difference. But I would like for us to think carefully about that and the definitions that I will be using throughout this video. First, the definition of supernatural. For the purpose of this video, I will define the term supernatural as the actor or actors in a scene who are non-human dwellers of the divine realm. And this includes angelic beings, demonic forces, and deities in general. With that being said, we need to define what we mean by miraculous. So by miraculous, I mean actions which take place under the direction or by direct input of a supernatural being. Examples of which include spontaneous healings, events which counter a natural process, and normally unpredictable but otherwise natural events. The biblical material, of course, is littered with such testimonies. And Joshua 10, we encounter a miracle. Indeed, we do. But is it the miracle we think it is? One of the issues with Joshua 10, of course, is the fact that it is layered with subtext. From the setup of events to the names of locations that are referenced in the text, Joshua 10 is heavily laden with subtext that the casual reader would miss. Moreover, if you're using an English translation exclusively, you'll completely miss significant words and how they're used. Most of our attention is centered around what we think is the miracle. But is it the miracle? First, we need to look at a history lesson. When chapter 10 opens, we are flung into the aftermath of the defeat of Ai and the response of the 5 Amorite kings to that news. In response, they decide to attack the city of Gibeon, which had just signed a non-aggression pact with the Israelites, according to chapter 9. And if you go back and read chapter 9, you will see that Gibeon comes to that conclusion by means of subterfuge. So when the Amorites lay siege to Gibeon, The people send a messenger to Joshua for aid, and Joshua responds, immediately gathering his troops and marching through the night with the blessing and promise of Yahweh, who says in verse 8 of chapter 10, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." When Joshua and the army arrives, we have a clear description of a miracle that happens. Yahweh threw them into panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by way of the ascent to Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, when they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, Yahweh threw down large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Notice we have a clear description of a miracle. Yahweh threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. That is our miracle, that God rains down stones from heaven, killing the fleeing Amorite army, and killing more than the Israelites themselves did. Remember, our definitions from earlier. This is a miracle by that definition. Why is that? We'll look at verse 14. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. But Trigger Man, you say, what about verses 12 and 13? Ah, yes. Those are the verses where everyone thinks there's a miracle. But remember how I defined the term supernatural, which means we need to ask a question. What are the sun and moon and the stars? To begin with, we need to answer the question. When you look up at the sky and you see all the celestial objects, what are they? Well, for us, in our modern context, they're material objects and they're composed of matter. The moon, by the best scientists, is believed to be a piece of debris from a celestial collision with our planet. The sun, our sun, is just a star like all the other stars. It's a tightly packed ball of gases that is on fire. That's very simplistic, I know, so don't get too hyper about that. Our present understanding of these objects is limited to their composition as natural phenomena. The ancients, however, saw these as something else. For them, the sun, moon, and stars were, well, lack of a better term, the loudspeaker of the gods. They were the means by which the divine realm communicated to the terrestrial realm. Now, we might laugh at that, but the biblical authors themselves put great emphasis on this fact. In fact, we can say that from the beginning, that's their exact purpose. And so, as it says in Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." Notice the function of the celestial objects. The first function. And let them be for signs. Now, the Hebrew word here is the word oath, and it refers to signals, to portents, omens. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, this word gets rendered by a word that's very familiar to Christians, semeion. This word is used specifically in the Gospel of John in reference to actions undertaken by Jesus to demonstrate his identity. But I digress, because something else that we should note in Genesis 1, that being the fact that verse 16 of that chapter specifically avoids the use of the words sun and moon. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. The specific reason for this is that in Hebrew, the word that gets translated as sun and moon are actually the names of two deities, Shemash and Yeriach. Why is it important that we know these names? Because they reside at the head of the Canaanite pantheon as co-deities who determine the outcome of events, we must remember the warning of Deuteronomy 4:19, which reads, "Beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven when you see the sun, Shamash, and the moon, Uriach, and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven." The culture of the Canaanites was soaked in a superstitious paganism that Israel was to have no part in. Also, when we look at the map of Gibeon, right here in the center of the map, we have the center of worship of Shamash and Uriach, and they get destroyed by the Israelites in subsequent battles. So, in Joshua 10, we have the names of deities, and we have a center of their worship, all being involved in the same story. And then we have this curious command: sun stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. The words that are translated as stop or stand still, while they do mean to cease motion or even to be quiet, in terms of ancient astrology, they actually refer to a relative movement of the sun and moon to each other. For just an example, it's morning and the sun rises, but soon after, the moon rises with it, and they begin a pursuit through the day, with one appearing to chase the other throughout it. And an ancient person would say that they had stopped, even though we could still see them moving. However, in relation to one another, their movement would appear to have ceased. Now, I've worked outdoors most of my life, and I would notice times when it did appear that the sun and moon were chasing one another. Now, we don't attach meaning to that, to those particular movements of the celestial bodies through the heavens. In fact, we probably ignore it. But an ancient pagan who did associate the movement of the sun, moon, and stars with divine communication, depending on their orientation of the pursuit through the heavens, they would perceive such as an omen, either good or bad, depending on their orientation. Perhaps the significance of the sign is found in the names of the places over which they occurred. In fact, they're said to have stopped over Gibeon and over the valley of Ajalon. So these sites likely held significance to those ancient people, which unfortunately eludes us today. However, the fact that such an omen is directly tied by name to those pagan deities who were believed to control the outcome of events, the polemical aspect of the text should not be ignored or dismissed out of hand. In fact, such an interpretation is supported by almost a parallel incident in Judges 5:20, where it reads, "From heaven the stars fought, and from their courses they fought against Sisera." Now, does this mean that the stars descended from heaven and engaged in the battle against Sisera alongside the Israelites? Or is it saying something else? But Trigger Man, aren't you denying that there's a miracle? Not at all. Let me explain. First, the interpretation that I'm proposing, the supernatural explanation, fits within the original sociocultural context of the events as they're being portrayed. Second, it maintains the polemical power of the text as it fits within that original context of Yahweh's wars against the gods of the Canaanites. Lastly, given the previous 2 points, it avoids importing unjustifiable assumptions or prior conclusions into the text. In other words, it's not eisegetical. As Christians, as people committed to the veracity and authority of the biblical text as the sole and infallible rule of the faith, our primary concern should be to interpret the text correctly. And to do that, we must interpret it within the historical context in which it arose. With that being said, I'm Triggerman1976. Thanks for tuning into the BLOGCAST. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it, If you found it informative, please share it with your friends. If you don't mind, please hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Sugarman1976. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Sugarman1976. God bless and have a good day.